And as you wander through the centre of Manchester, you may be surprised to suddenly encounter another iconic figure from history, Abraham Lincoln. There he stands, as he has done for decades, stoically watching over the comings and goings of the people of Manchester. He looks strangely out of place against the backdrop of modern office blocks and trendy coffee shops, but his presence bears testimony to a very significant moment in Manchester's past. A series of events that are immortalised by a letter whose text is actually inscribed on the plinth of his statue. You may just be able to make out that letter on the bottom. It is a letter that he wrote to the working people of Manchester on the 19th of January 1863. And in that letter, he described the action of those mill workers in the previous month as an act of sublime Christian heroism. These are the words he actually uses. I cannot but regard your decisive utterances as an instance of sublime Christian heroism, which has not been surpassed in any age or in any country. So what on earth was Lincoln writing about? Well, to explain, I need to remind you that at the time, the American nation was in a state of civil war. Lincoln was seeking to unify the nation against the commitment in the North that slavery should come to an end. And the states in the South were seeking to resist that commitment because they simply had too much to lose. And so, as the southern states continued to seek to maintain their economy through the growth and export of cotton, the northern states sought to eradicate slavery from the nation. And the southern states made an appeal to the United Kingdom. What had happened was that Lincoln's navy had blockaded the ports of the south, so that the cotton that came from the plantations could not be exported. And in that way, he hoped to bring slavery to an end. The rich merchants of Liverpool, dare I say, were putting pressure on the government to use our own navy to break Lincoln's blockade. If only Lincoln's blockade could be broken, the cotton could flow again, the mills of Lancashire could work again, and money could be made, and slavery would perpetuate. And so it was that the working people of Manchester met on New Year's Day 1863, and they passed a resolution that if any cotton arrived in the ports of Liverpool and found its way into the mills of Manchester, if any hand that had touched that cotton was not free, they would not work the cotton. And so suddenly all the efforts to break the blockade proved futile, because even if the cotton could be got out of the ports of the southern states, the people of Manchester, which was the centre of the cotton industry in the UK at the time, had said, we will not weave it, we will not mill it, we will not touch it if the last hand that touched it was not free. Now, this was no easy commitment. This was known at the time as the cotton famine. Many of the men and women who made that commitment were already starving, were already living lives of indescribable poverty. In fact, for all the fact that they were slaves, people tell us that at the time, life expectancy of children born to slave families on the plantations of the southern states of America, the average life expectancy was longer than that of a child born to a working family in northern England in the cotton towns. I told this story a little while ago to a group of Baptists up in the northwest, and one of the women, a lady herself of some years now, told us the story of her grandmother. Her grandmother was fortunate in that the mill that she had been working in had managed to source cotton at the time from suppliers in the Middle East. At that time, Egyptian cotton wasn't the great luxury that it is today, but it was actually a lower grade cotton. And apparently her grandmother, having worked in the mill since the age of 10, at 17 years of age was retired from the mill, spent worthless, her lungs destroyed by the dust from milling low-grade cotton, expected to live just a few years more, so at 17 years of age she was retired. They were the conditions of the working people of Lancashire, who nonetheless believed in a higher ideal of freedom and were willing to sacrifice their own livelihoods for that cause. Now, whether or not we agree with Lincoln's words, whether or not we may want to argue that there were perhaps greater acts of heroism, greater acts of Christian sacrifice that we may want to reflect on, nonetheless, it seems to me that it is a fascinating proposition that Lincoln makes. In many respects, we might say that those Manchester mill workers changed history. What they did changed history. And I want to ask you a question this evening. What would have happened if their faith had remained contained by church and chapel alone? No doubt they would have offered fervent prayers for Lincoln's cause as they met Sunday by Sunday. No doubt they would have prayed for those who were caught in the yoke of slavery. Perhaps they may have even heard stirring sermons about this iniquity that had to be eradicated. And maybe they would have offered prayers of thanksgiving for their own liberty. But perhaps we should thank God that their faith did not remain contained by the institution of the church. And I find that interesting because we often speak of Christians today as those who might change the world. Particularly when I hear people speaking to young people, when I hear my own teenage kids constantly being sold an idea that to be a Christian is to be a world changer, and there's nothing wrong with that. But usually, dare I say, those who speak in these terms are seeking to recruit them to the grand schemes and the great ideas of the church, that they will change the world by participating in what it is that we have worked out for them to do. And I want to suggest to you that the story of the Lancashire mill workers might challenge us to imagine that maybe the world could be even more dramatically changed if we simply encouraged one another to take that faith, to take that Christian gospel, to take that understanding of God's kingdom, and irrespective of what it might cost, to take the example of those mill workers and say, how might the world be changed if I take my faith to work? Was Jerusalem builded here among those dark Satanic mills? Well, I believe in 1863 it was. Thank you.